Peter.
Zoom is, yeah, it's good. Oh, all right.
Is he away?
I think he's just been late.
No, he's not here. But, just a note on that. We've got to work through the changes to the emergency declaration before we begin the meeting. We actually lose our ability to do Zoom meetings once the state emergency directive finishes. So you go back to mandatory in-person meetings. There is no flexibility under the current legislation for Zoom meetings once the emergency state emergency directive.
Okay.
It's contingent on there being a state emergency, please.
Never that up. Thank you, everyone. Welcome here for the ordinary meeting of council for Tuesday, 19th of April, 2022. Just a note that the meeting is being recorded, and the recording of the meeting will be published with the minutes because we've got one elected member attending via electronic means. So with that, I'll hand over to Mayor Brad Flood.
Thanks, Matt. Acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge the Bungala people, the traditional owners of the land we meet on today, and their continuing connection to the land, sea, culture and community. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and we extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people within our community. The City of Port Lincoln acknowledges and respects the diversity of cultural heritage and beliefs within our community. As a council, we are committed to serving the best interests and needs of all people in our city, and we endeavour to discharge our duties conscientiously to the best of our ability. Thanks very much. Please be seated. Welcome to the gallery, people presenting tonight, staff, elected members. Thank you very much. Being here electronically as well. So I'll just go around. We have present Councillor Broadfoot, Councillor Rousell, Deputy Mayor Jack Ritchie, Councillor Peter Lynn, Councillor Staunton and Councillor Jeff Dodd. We have an apology from Councillor Davis, and we have Councillor Jolly is a non-show.
Noting that there may be an apology, however, as Amanda's away at the moment, that might be just note on that.
So declarations of conflict of interest. I'll go around the room. Councillor Broadfoot.
No.
Rousell, Jack.
I've just added a perceived one for 9.2 SA Water Project Team and Stakeholder Engagement, EP desal plant project and site selection process. I'm sitting on that committee as a chamber representative, so just to proceed.
Okay, and just for information, there's no conflict as far as I'm concerned. The Chief Executive Officer and myself also sit on that committee as part of the council representation. Councillor Storm. Yeah, better. Okay. Thank you. And paperwork, Jack, you'll get to.
Yep.
Thank you. Item 4 is a confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting. Unless there's any discussion, I'll take a mover on that. Councillor Broadfoot, you want to speak on it? Another second, please. Councillor Dodd, would you like to speak on it, Jeff? Any speakers for or against? All those in favour? Motion carried. Item 5 is adjourned items, there are nil. Item 6, questions with and without notice, there are nil. Item 7, notice of motion, nil. Item 8, petitions, nil. Item 9, we have deputations and representations. We were going to have Mr. Jonathan Robin present tonight for Operation Flinders. However, unfortunately, again, he's a close contact and he's had to cancel coming across. He would like at some stage in the future to address the council, and I suggested to him that perhaps we can do it by Zoom. It would be more convenient. So follow through that with you. Item 9.2 is the South Australian Water Project Team and Stakeholder Engagement for the EP Desalination Plant project and site selection process. It's a community update. We have the chair of the selection committee, Mr. Peter Treloar, also Mr. Gary Neve, project director, and Mr. Steve Dangerfield, stakeholder engagement. I think, Steve, you're going to be doing the presentation, are you?
Yeah.
Go ahead, mate. Come on up the front, thanks. I'll request elected members and staff keep questions to the end and go through there. We normally restrict presentations to 10 minutes, Steve, but I understand you probably need 15 and we've got the time for that. So I'll get it.
All right, thank you to the Mayor and to the Council for having us this evening to provide you with an update on this important project for Eyre Peninsula. I gather that there has been conversations and presentations in the past to the Council on this project. I think most of you are probably aware that there was a change in direction late last year that we'll provide some context on shortly, and the team that's here tonight has been brought into play as a consequence of that change in direction. So what I'm going to do is just give you a very brief contextual update by way of a little bit of background, then give you an understanding as to the project team that has been appointed and is now in place and how the project is being run, the engagement process briefly, and then the site selection committee that has been established, the function and purpose of that committee, and then most particularly the sites that have been shortlisted for detailed assessment that the site selection committee has only just recently last week identified through a process and has determined that a short list of 4 sites will be investigated for detailed assessment in the coming months. As the Mayor indicated, once we've finished the presentation, we'll open the floor for conversation and discussion, questions, and Gary Neve and Peter Treloar are here to assist in that question period. Just very briefly to run you through the background context, as you know, this project's been around for some years. Back in 2009, the Long-Term Water Security Plan identified desalination as a preferred solution to potable water security for the Eyre Peninsula. Now, that document was quite, and still remains, an important document in the whole process that's been undertaken presently today, on the basis that all councils signed up to that particular long-term water security planning document. Initial work was then undertaken by SA Water in 2012 to identify a preferred location, and the focus started to emerge on the Sleaford area as a preferred location. Other sites were considered around Ceduna and north of Tumby Bay, but back in 2012, the preference was to look at something in the southern area of the peninsula for reasons I'll mention in a moment. The project was then put on hold, but the long-term planning document remained a relevant and a live document. And in 2018, the project recommenced, focusing again on the Sleaford area, and land was purchased in that location for the purpose of desalination. In 2019, the original Sleaford site was shifted to the west of Sleaford Bay. So the original site being at the northern end of the bay, if you like, around where the bay sort of turns to the south. And then that particular site was relocated to the west of the bay. And then in 2012, due to geotechnical issues, SA Water then identified another site that you'll be familiar with at Burleigh Lights Point. Now in 2021, obviously there was some significant concerns that were raised, firstly by the aquaculture industry and then by the community more generally. And in late 2021, new data demonstrated sufficient recharge in the US South groundwater basin, which provides a majority of water for the peninsula, to enable a 12-month pause on the project. Now, the then former Minister, the Honourable David Spears, Minister for Environment and Water, in late December 2021 announced that the pause on the project would be utilised to undertake further scientific investigations and particularly community engagement. And then in January this year, TSA Management consulting firm was appointed as an independent body to lead the project, and Peter Treloar was selected as the independent chair for the site selection committee, and I'll say more about that in a moment. Just in terms of the project team itself and the role that TSA has to play, Gary and I both work for TSA. Gary is actually the Regional General Manager for South Australia for TSA. And Gary was appointed as the project director for this project to take it forward as of January this year. And I was asked to get involved from an engagement point of view and to set a strategy that genuinely involved community in the decision-making process around site selection. And I'll say more about that with respect to the site selection committee in a moment, which is essentially the anchor of the process. Some of our other staff are also involved in engineering and project management roles. Over on the right-hand side, critical to the process is SA Water. It will be an SA Water owned asset at the end of the process. So Sean Ambrose here in Port Lincoln has a really important role to play. Sandra Klein, from a community engagement point of view, who I believe has presented to council before, is continuing to work on the team and support Gary and myself in the community engagement work. And we also are engaging with the Environment, Science and Heritage Services within SA Water and the Engineering Services team as well. At the bottom of the screen is a reference to an independent marine scientific review panel. We've taken the step to bring together an independent panel that will comprise leading national experts that will review data and conclusions from that science and data, and they will also act as peer reviews of that information and support the regulatory approval process. They will also continue beyond the feasibility and planning phase of the project into the operational space. So this group of people will play a very important role throughout the process, and the site selection committee, comprising leaders and community representatives and industry representatives from around the peninsula, have been exposed to the way in which that panel will be established, the terms of reference, and also the individuals that comprise that panel, and have made recommendations of various names to that panel, and a couple in particular were accepted and appointed to that panel, having been recommended from the site selection committee. Now, the engagement process itself, very briefly, I won't go through the detail here, but just to give you an understanding, a snapshot, I guess, of the process that we're putting into play and have done since January this year. The green section in the middle of that slide, just here, represents the site selection committee, which from these sectors on the left-hand side, we've taken representatives from these sectors to comprise this committee of a membership of approximately 20. That committee will work through these particular steps in order to determine a preferred site that has a social licence and to recommend that site to SA Water and the government. So the role of the site selection committee is to work through all the information as it is developed through the process and to make a recommendation to government on a site that is economically viable, that has a defined funding model that is able to support it, that has the endorsement of the entire committee, and can demonstrate that community support, that social licence, and is able to be endorsed and supported by government and SA Water. There are key inputs to the process. There is the inputs from the project team, First Nations, and we've been speaking to them just recently around the shortlist. We had the NAO group out on site a couple of weekends ago. So they are critical to the process, and subject matter experts. The information solicited from those groups will influence the decision-making of the committee. This section up here briefly represents the broader community process, which we're about to embark on to seek broader community input, to give community the opportunity to have a say around the shortlisted sites, and that process will commence in the next week or so. In terms of timeframes, we are working to a December 2024 timeframe to have a plant constructed and commissioned. Working back from that date to allow for all the approvals and the documentation and the detailed design and procurement process means we need a site selected and identified by the site selection committee at the end of July 2022. So it is a demanding schedule to get from January to end of July, and to have the committee informed enough to be able to make a clear decision around the preferred site. In terms of the function and purpose of the Site Selection Committee, this was the brief that was given to the Site Selection Committee at its opening meeting by the Minister, the former Minister for Environment and Water. There's a couple of things I'd just like to point out to you or make clear, that the Minister was very clear about identifying a site that had a social licence. And the committee went through a process of defining social licence and included that in its terms of reference. The other parameters put on the project is that the technology has already been determined. That is not up for discussion. The plant will be owned and operated by SA Water. It will be a single desalination plant to service the existing SA Water network and customers both now and future that might connect to the existing SA Water network. So it will be a single plant and a single site. A budget allocation of around 100 to 150 million, with scope for additional funding based on business case. That might be federal government, possibly it might be state. There may be other grants that could be accessed for various purposes. That is all going to be part of the determination that the committee will need to work through in the coming months. Billy Light's point is remain as a base case. We need something as a comparative analysis against the existing, against the shortlisted sites. So that site will be taken forward and remain on the table as that base case. Having said that, the brief to the Site Selection Committee is to identify an alternative site with a social licence, noting that Billy Light's Point does not have that social licence. And the Minister did say that if it all got too hard, do nothing was an option. That is not the position of the committee. The committee don't believe that do nothing is an option, and it's certainly not the view of TSA as the independent. We believe that there is a solution to be found, and our job is to support the work of the committee in that regard. I won't go through this in detail, but the Site Selection Committee did identify a set of objectives. Those objectives will drive their decision making. And there are a couple of things that just I wish to point out. That in the committee's view, the site needs to be able to deliver a sustainable and secure water supply for the entire Eyre Peninsula, for all those on the SA Water system. So water security is critical, a critical objective that will guide decision making. There needs to be the support from the community. There's an opportunity here to improve potable water quality. There's also an opportunity to plan or use this project for future economic growth opportunities. So a site that is selected should enable that to happen rather than curtailing those opportunities. And there needs to be a mitigation of risk for industries that and neighbours, site neighbours that might be impacted by the operation of the plant. In terms of the shortlist that has been determined, the committee has now met 6 times in a short space of time and considered a lot of information, and has gone through around about 25 sites or thereabouts in a sort of a high-level review process to identify which sites we will spend our energy, effort and time in terms of the detailed site assessment. And there were a number of parameters that were considered by the committee, particularly this first one, the ability to be able to deliver water into the southern end of the network in order to provide water security for all. And that's a critical factor. The water security system, the water system for SA Water is geared from south to north. And so the opportunity to plug water into the southern end of the system will assist in managing cost and also help deliver that water security for all customers on the network. There are other various constraints, engineering constraints. The further north you go with a particular site, the more costly it is to bring water back to the southern end of the network, and that impact on the aquaculture industry also needed to be considered in determining the shortlist. There's a list of the sites that were considered. We dealt with it through precinct by precinct We eliminated the precincts based on those criteria you saw a minute ago, down to what we're calling here a southern precinct in and around the Sleaford Bay area, and the North Shields precinct, which is just north of Port Lincoln, obviously, and up and around the Louth Bay area, were the two that were initially identified, and then various sites within those precincts were considered. And just last week, the committee determined that this would be the shortlist that would be considered. At North Shields precinct, we'll look closely at Point Boston, and that deliberately is considering that whole coastline in that section there. So we haven't yet pinpointed an exact site, but we are considering from the top of the peninsula to the bottom on that outer coastline, and we're going through a process now of identifying what site might be applicable or appropriate along that coastline. In the south, we're looking at Sleaford West, Shoal Point and Sleaford North, and I said before, the Billy Lights Point site remains as a base case. In terms of identifying those other sites, those other three sites on a map for you, the Shoal Point area, looking at this area up here, we obviously have infrastructure out with the Yulee Basin, which is attractive from that point of view. We are looking in terms of interface to the coastal area, the Shoal Point, and right up to this bottom section of Gunya Beach where it meets the cliffs. The challenge for this particular site will be the ability to be able to get water from the ocean onto land with respect to the coastal interface. It's a very difficult coastline to plan for and to manage the engineering. Those of you who've been out there will be familiar with that. So that's not an easy solution, but we think that there's opportunity to investigate that further. Sleaford North coming in at that northern end of the bay, and the reason the rectangle is like this, could probably go sort of across like this and back down, is because we're not limited to putting the plant on the coastline or at the location where we take water in and put water back out. We can put the plant inland and just run longer intake and outlet pipes. So we are going to be looking at sites inland for the desal plant in relation to the coastal interface. And then the Sleaford West area, from all of this coastline down to the bottom to this little beach here, we will be looking for a site along that section of coast as well. That photograph is of the Kangaroo Island desalination plant to give you an idea of scale. This plant would be about 8 of those. So if you lined up 8 of that footprint, that is about the size or the scale of this plant. Series of sheds and tanks is what you're expecting or would be expecting for the plant. And finally, my last comment is just around the community engagement that we intend to undertake on those 4 shortlisted sites. We are doing a number of presentations to all the councils and various community boards. We are interested in seeking that feedback from the broader community, and there is a schedule of times where we're going to be in various townships and providing that sort of drop-in arrangement where people can come through, view the sites, and if they are interested in providing comment, then that opportunity will be made available to them. There will also be advertised an online survey that will be held on the SA Water Talks website as well. I'll leave it there. There's probably more questions than I've answered. I'm happy to close the presentation there and hand back to the Mayor for questions.
Are there any questions?
Yeah. Thanks for that. I'm just wondering about the appetite of the incoming government and what's happening in the briefings there, and yeah, what has there been a shift in looking at funding allocation?
Very good question. There has been briefing papers and a conversation between the Chief Executive of SA Water and the new ministers that has occurred. The new minister has indicated her support for the process that we're going through at the moment. So the site selection committee, the engagement process, the intent to undertake concept design work on all 4 of those sites. So that process is being supported by the current minister and the current government. Peter Treloar, in his role as the independent chair, has reached out to the minister, and that opportunity has been welcomed to have an independent conversation with Peter. And probably the thing to make note of there is that Peter has been appointed as independent and representing the community from that perspective. So that conversation, I don't know, Peter, whether there's a date blocked away yet, but that's...
Don't have a date yet, Steve, but certainly I've been in correspondence with the Minister's office.
Yeah. In terms of budget, our view is that will be worked through in the process with the support of the process from the new government. That's what was critical. In supporting that process, the whole budget question will be part of the process itself and part of ongoing briefings as we identify detailed costings around these particular sites and what implication that may or may not have, both in terms of government approval, but also in terms of broader economic value to Eyre Peninsula. And I think that whole story needs to be put together and told, and we're only going to be able to do that when we start the detailed work on those particular sites.
Just an addendum questions. I think they're announcing a new budget on June 2nd. So, yeah, I think they are announcing a new budget on June 2nd. So I just wonder if there's a piece of work to try and get some funds out of them, at that juncture.
Probably what's worth noting is that the work that's been done to date on the budget allocation is within SA Water's regulated business. So there is an allocation within the regulated business framework that SA Water puts in an application to the Essential Services Commission of South Australia, and that is endorsed and that has been put into play in the current business process. So any additional funds will require conversations with the state government, and also we're assuming with other funding sources such as the federal government. So there is a process with SA Water to actually seek funding. That's through a SCOSA primarily when it's for regulated business. Outside of that, it will be subject to ongoing conversations with the new government and with the federal government.
Thank you. The touch will be from the meetings that Peter has first up with us. That'll give us an indication of what direction we yes, Jim.
Steve, the weighting given to social licence in the process.
Yeah.
What's the minister's perspective on that weighting that's been given to it?
Yes, well, the minister, or the former minister, has put a significant weighting on it, and hence the reason we're going through this process, because the previous site doesn't have that social licence, and he made that very clear that he understood that, and that he was expecting that this process would dish up a solution that has a social licence. So we went through the process as a committee of determining a definition around that. So when we get to ranking sites from a formal assessment perspective, which the committee will do towards the end when all the information is presented, social licence will be a significant factor that needs to be resolved. And when we talk social licence here in this context, we're talking not just a sector, obviously, but we're talking broader community, and we're talking Indigenous, and a whole range of, the breadth of community, and that's going to be, something that's going to be challenging, I think. Every site that we look at has an issue of some description that can be linked back to social licence.
Just supplementary, so I noticed in the community engagement calendar, a lot of bakeries and cafes. I'm just concerned for your health, Steve.
You don't have to worry about me. I've got celiac disease, so I'll be fine. It's the project director that could be in trouble. But in all seriousness, we deliberately have taken a different approach. We wanted to be accessible and be in areas of high traffic, rather than actually being hidden away in a memorial hall somewhere and expecting people to come to us. We wanted to go to where the high traffic locations are, so that people, we expose as many as we can to the information. So, but yes, there is that humorous side for sure.
I think a step through too from And the fact that there has been a review from the original Midland site point to the 4 points that we're doing now, means that we're not going to get a lot of opposition. A lot of people are interested in screaming and yelling at. The key point, the pivot point will be when Peter goes to the new minister to see what her angle is going to be, and then probably the next key pivot point beyond community consultation will be, do we need supplementary funding and where we're going to get it and how we're going to get it. But then,
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, yes. I think they are the three key challenges here. The first one I think is fairly, we've already laid some groundwork, and I would expect that the conversation Peter has will be positive and a positive one and a supportive one based on what we understand to date. The second one being the social licence isn't going to be without its challenge. And the third one absolutely is going to require the committee, the site selection committee, to work together to identify and to leverage its connections, networks, understanding in order to potentially identify other sources of funding. I agree.
yeah, all right. Is there any further questions, Steve or Gary? Or
I think, Brad, can I just add, I think it's really reiterating what has been said already, but the committee, I believe, is working well, and it's a rather unique opportunity that we have as a community, I think, to have so much input into a decision that's about to be made. And in relation to social licence, Dottie, I think the fact that we've come up with our very own definition of what we believe social licence should be and included that in our terms of reference really means that, for the committee at least, we're very much focused on that as well. Anything else I've missed?
Well, it's a good representative committee as well.
Sorry?
It's a very good representative committee.
Yeah, I'm really pleased with the way it's going.
Okay. Anything else? Great, thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you.
Thank you. And the work is ongoing, obviously. So. Andrew?
We actually got a copy of the presentation.
I'll check. Steve?
Yeah.
We get a copy of the presentation for the elected members.
Yes, that's. I think it's on the memory stick there, and I'm going to download it and hand it on.
Do you want this one back?
Yes, thank you.
And sorry to keep interrupting, even though we've mentioned this a number of times, the general public's able to follow minutes of our meetings on the SA Water website. So that's available to one and all once they're ratified. So it's all very transparent, and people will have the opportunity to have input as well. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you, members.
Thank you, members.
Yeah. So moving right along. Oh, sorry. Okay, so I need a move for the recommendation regarding deputation of the SA Water Project team be received and noted. Can we move it, please? Robin, you want to speak on it?
No, it's just wonderful to be able to hear it all and the progress that they're making. It's really cool. Thank you.
Next second. Valerie, yep. Do you want to speak on it?
The social licence is good, that's heavily weighted, and then, like I said, there's going to be issues in each area and varying issues, so it'll be interesting how that gets resolved. That's good to see progress.
Any speakers for or against? All those in favour? Motion carried. Thanks for that, Matt. So that's right. Item 10 is elected members' reports. Is there any questions on my activity report? Yes.
Yeah, just a question on the meeting with member Linda Santelfer and the priorities that were covered in that meeting.
The first priority, I think, was the desalination plant. Second one we spoke about was the Department of Infrastructure and Transport roads through the city and the interaction between road trains, road conditions, pedestrians and small vehicle traffic, road trains. That was probably the second priority. We also discussed tourism, the bringing in of the cruise ships next season and the process that we were going to go through with that. Sam was quite particular about the fact that he wanted the the councils to work in unison with him as a representative of the area, regardless of politics or anything like that. He asked that where confidentiality was an issue, that he be advised of any interaction between councils and the government, so that he could actually make sure that it's part of his value with them, that he would be able to support and represent us in any discussions that might have there. So in doing that, we've actually provided him with letters that we've written to the ministers. They're just introductory letters, basically. But again, where there's no confidentiality, I couldn't see any issues with that. I think that we would present as a much stronger environment of for example, the 3 lower area councils plus the local member, or the EP councils plus the local member, I think. So, he said to me that he would be quite active in the space in South Australia. That is. So yeah, he's just getting his feet under the desk. So they were the 3 main things. We did talk about fishing industry and agriculture. Really, nothing. There wasn't any new news. I think that the key salient point there is that he wants to do as much as he can, and rather than have 11 councils plus him operating in different directions, that we were operating the same priorities and going in the same direction. Much a step through from where he was.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? No. Good. Deputy Mayor Richie, do you want to speak on that at all?
Nothing to add on that. Or just a comment there on the Children's University launch. That's a very interesting project, and I think we'll hear more here as well. So yeah, it's a positive development.
We're going to meeting on that coming up. I think that we went there for the opening, so we've got another meeting that we'll get to. Councillor Broadfoot.
No, nothing to add, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Rousseau.
No, I think it's all there, thank you.
Councillor Lim.
Only the visit to the school chambers was good fun, with the first question being what happened if the mayor died, and the follow-up question was what if all the councillors died. So it was interesting.
The trouble was, I stuck my head in there, so they asked that one. So
Yes, he did.
yeah, okay. Councillor Jolly's not here. Councillor Davis, she's on leave. Councillor Staunton.
Just the special council meeting Uni Hub by Zoom. I think that's when I had COVID. And the space info session, I was on Zoom, the budget workshop and the CBD car park. Nothing extra.
And Councillor Dodd.
Yeah, same as Valerie, special council, space aid session, budget workshop, business forum on CBD.
Which was quite well. I think. Okay. Item 11 is Chief Executive Officer items for discussion. Over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Mayor Brad. Just as written in there, so just one of the updates that's come out in the last week or so is the progression of the local government reform. So the SCOSA oversight released their framework approach to local government rate oversight. So this is part of the local government reform that was brought in through previous governments. There is a paper which has been released by SCOSA on framework. They've released over a rolling 4-year period different councils that will be subjected to the framework in each of that 4-year period. We are included as one of the councils in the first year or the first tranche of councils, which means that we need to basically participate in the SCOSA process in September this year. Current status is that the LGA are seeking feedback from councils by the 13th of May. So once we've had a chance to review that, we'll provide some feedback to the LGA, and the LGA will provide a sector-wide response to SCOSA in relation to their proposed. The long and the short of it is that this will be basically an assessment of the long-term financial plans, council's capacity, the reasonableness and affordability of the plans.
and also the fact that councils are expected to pay a SCOSA to undergo this process. So the cost there is $52,000 per council, and that's the additional cost that we need to budget next year to pay for the SCOSA assessment of councils' finances in September. I don't believe SCOSA will have any power of direction, and what it looks like is that the SCOSA will start the assessment in September this year. So we after council set their annual business plans and long-term financial plans for the 22-23 year. They will then provide a preliminary or draft report to councils who have been assessed in the first tranche or first bunch. That assessment will come back in around February, March next year. And then I believe there'll be an opportunity to provide feedback on that. They'll provide a final report, probably March, April. That final report then needs to be published alongside next year, 23-24's annual business plan and long-term financial plans as an assessment of those plans. So that's the process that we're working through. And as I said, we'll just be reviewing the material and providing information back to the LGA, and the LGA will be providing a sector-wide response. Second item there was just clarification. Councillor Broadfoot just raised the question of the previous notice of motion, just acknowledging that the previous action on that was to include that in the marine facilities strategy, but noting that we're in the process of setting next year's budget. It's probably reasonable to allocate a nominal amount in next year's budget, which can be used as contribution co-funding, because we'll then likely have progressed the marine coastal facility strategy by the time we get to that. The only other item I'll just note in there is the Tri-Council meeting, which I believe is on the 5th of May next month, which upcoming comes. So just finalising the agenda for that between the three CEOs. Other than that, happy to take questions on anything else.
Very nice of the SCOSA to charge $52,000. The honour of winning the first tranche.
Yeah, for you, Brad, similar question. So given we've got a new incoming state government, is the process still continuing? Is there a position of the incoming state government, or let's just sort of already started rolling and
To be advised, I think that's part of the feedback the LGA will be looking to establish for councils, and then I think the LGA on behalf of the sector will be looking to have a conversation with Jeff Brock, as incoming government minister, and how he sees, I guess, the reforms rolling out of different governments. So I think that's, Jeff Brock actually spoke at the LGA OGM last week before, and was very committed to working very, very closely with local government. I guess having previously held that portfolio as well for several years. So and a mayor as well. So yeah. So I think there's some further discussions there. But I guess legislation is as it is written at the moment. So SCOSA is enacting that until there's any further changes to that. But I think one of the key elements there is the funding for that. And SCOSA has proposed that the LGA levy the councils and that the LGA pay a SCOSA. And there's no mechanism for the LGA to do that. So there's a few things that need to be worked through, which is what the LGA will second one response. But in effect, it's $52,000 per council for the process. That'll be a 4-year cycle. So in 4 years' time or 3 years' time, we'll have to pay another $50,000 plus whatever the indexation is to have the same process be revisited again. So
you imagine a council like Ellison having. Anyway. Okay, is there any further questions on that? Okay, thank you very much. Item 12 is council committee reports and minutes. 12.1 is the confirmation of minutes of the special council meeting held on Wednesday, 23 March 22. Is there any discussion on that? Jack, do you want to move it?
Happy to.
Do you want to speak on it?
No.
Another second, please. Councillor Staunton, would you like to speak on it? Okay, speakers for and against. All those in favour? Motion carried. Thank you. Item 13, Chief Executive Officer report, resolution status report over to you, Matt, and there is a movement.
thanks, Mayor Brad. Just as written, there's only 2 items
stating in the action list. Again, happy to take any questions on those.
It's good to see that it's reduced. Any questions at all from that? No questions? Can I have a move then, please? Councillor Rousseau, would you like to speak on it?
No, I just appreciate the update. It's really good. Thank you.
No, a second, please. Councillor Stewart, would you like to speak on it? No. Speakers for and against? All those in favour? Motion carried. Thank you. Item 13.2 is the CEO annual leave and appointment of the acting CEO. Let's do pretty straightforward. Councillor Broadfoot's to move the recommendation. No, you want to speak on it?
No.
No,
Happy with
second.
that.
Councillor Deputy Mayor Ritchie, you want to speak on it?
all good.
Speakers for or against? All those in favour? Motion carried. Thank you. I am looking at you up there, Peter, too, by the way. Item 13.3 is the amended delegations under the Planning Development and Infrastructure Act. Matt, I'll throw to you on this one, but it's really just.
Thanks, Mayor Brad. It's just further changes to the delegations under the PDI Act as a result of some of the amendments to the Act. So this is any questions as thanks, Mayor Brad.
Thanks. So the recommendation I'll take is 1, unless there's any questions for Matt on that. Can I have a mover for the whole recommendation, please?
Yeah.
Councillor Dodd. You want to speak on it, Jeff? Second, Councillor Broadfoot, would you like to speak on it?
Okay.
Is there any speakers for and against? All those in favour? Motion carried. Thank you. It's just regulatory stuff. 13.4, Matthew Flinders Home request for access to land update. Over to you on that one, Matt, and there is a recommendation.
Thanks, Mayor Brad. I won't go into detail on this, just as it's written. So current status is that we've had conversations with Matthew Flinders without going into details of their conversations. They are comfortable that at this point, the most economical option for them is not to build over the drain stormwater reserve, but are grateful for the opportunity to have a discussion around it. There is likely to be further discussion around some minor incursion into the reserve for car parking as part of future development, but at this point, there's no need for us to take any further action. So just to close that one out, because there was a resolution passed in February to bring back.
Okay. Is there any questions of Matt? Okay, can I have a mover, please? Councillor Stewart, would you like to speak on it? Second, please. Councillor Rousseau, would you like to speak on it?
No, it's just good to see that we've been able to work with them and come to a great decision. Yeah, so it's good. Everyone seems to be happy. I'm pleased with that.
Speakers for or against? All those in favour? Motion carried. Thank you. Item 14 is the corporate and community reports, finance and business. This is 14.11. And support recreational access agreement, further deed of variation. Over to you, David, on that one.
Thanks, Matt Brad. It's very straightforward. We've been working with Flinders Sports over the last few months just to agree on this third deed of variation. Site map was updated and the insurance clause was worked through and agreed upon. So it's the recommendation for the mayor and CEO to sign off on it.
Pretty straightforward.
Question.
Yeah.
For you, Mayor Brad. The car park at the oil jetty, whose responsible is that? Whose responsibility is it?
Through you, Mayor Brad, I believe Councillor Broadfoot's referring to the car park that's full of potholes.
Yeah. The blocks.
It's not our responsibility.
Is it Flinders Sports' responsibility?
I'm happy to take, I've got an email in my inbox about this. I'm happy to take it and provide an update after the meeting once I've dug that email out. But yeah, it is a conversation that I've had in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I've got an email there related, but I can't recall off the top of my head. I believe it's.
I think it's Flinders Sports.
Just a further question on that, because I looked through the report and it does identify it as, to my understanding, that it is theirs, but it's got the community access point or unlimited community access, where the other areas don't have that. So I assumed it was theirs, but just yeah.
Yeah, anyway, take it on notice and we'll be advised afterwards. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I have a mover for the motion, please? Councillor Dodd, do you want to speak on it?
Straightforward.
Can I have a second, please? Councillor Broadfoot, would you like to speak on it? Any speakers for or against? All those in favour? Motion carried. Thank you. Item 14.2 is people governance and communications, Neil. 14.3 is community culture and recreation, youth parliament request for assistance. Over to you, David.
Thanks, Matt. Again, fairly straightforward. We've had a request for 3 delegates for this support, and we're proposing it comes out of the councillor's discretionary fund, and that we provide support for the full 480 program cost per delegate.
Any questions? No, you want to move it, Jack?
Very happy to move it as well. I think, yeah, that's a great initiative.
Okay, thanks. Second, councillor Rousseau.
Yeah, I think it's fabulous to support these young people, because you know, they're the future of Port Beacon, and when they start doing things like this, we're not going to encourage them to go to the council and really being proactive. So no, I think it's awesome. Thank you.
Speakers for and against? All those in favour? Motion carried. Thank you. Item 15 is environment and infrastructure reports, infrastructure and assets, additional disposal concession request. Over to you, JP.
Thanks, Mayor Brad. This one is relatively straightforward. As per section 5.1 of the waste management policy, any additional what we call disposal concessions, or what's also known as dump vouchers, we've got to bring to council. On the surface, it's relatively simple, but I've had an opportunity and fortune to meet with a number of charity organisations all in one set, and it was quite eye-opening to understand some of the challenges that they have, because I think part of what was driving this for me, while I was sort of writing this report, was when I looked at the number of dump vouchers that we had over the normal 12 that we get. So you look back at the last 5 years and see, oh wow, issuing a fair whack of these. So understanding the drivers behind it, I think was extremely important. And although this report's not here to kind of resolve a lot of those issues, it's about to highlight them and to understand that that's something that we need to work through as a council. And so over the last 5 years, we've on average about 146 vouchers that we've given, and that equates to about, based on today's fees, understanding each year they go up and down a little bit, but it's about $70,000 over 5 years, or about $13,000 or $14,000 per year on average that we're giving to organisations to go down. Now, if you look into it a little bit deeper into what is driving a lot of these things, there's 3 main factors. So there's unwanted donations, which seems to be the big one now. Unwanted donation is a very nice way of them putting it, but it's things that, in a sense, is garbage. It's rubbish that people either don't understand what they can dump, why, legislatively, regulatory, like they're not allowed to take certain items, all that sort of stuff. And we did have a discussion about, as organizations, we probably need to do more in terms of education and helping people understand, well, what is acceptable and what is not. So regardless of that, it's very apparent that even with that, there's still an element within the community where these antisocial behaviors and people that just don't want to pay the fee to dump their rubbish legally themselves, so they just dump it at the nearest salvage shop and move on. So it is a real problem, and it is something that we will work through as part of our waste management strategy moving forward. But I guess what we wanted to talk to here tonight about is potentially looking at upping that 12 to 60, I think, in the recommendation for the CEO or delegates to approve, because obviously it makes it a little bit difficult when the Salvation Army or some stuff that says, I need some dump vouchers, can you help us out? And I got to say, well, I got to come to council, and that's not for a month. So it kind of makes it a little bit impractical. And I really feel like this is something where we can help out. And so also understanding that I'm bringing the waste management policy that recommends those 12 per organisation per year to council probably next month. for a review of that policy and where we can discuss, well, what is the right amount or what is, where we should be. The recommendation for this report is probably just to get the CEO to have the approval for 60 disposal concessions per organisation, specifically for the purpose of managing those unwanted or those donations. But yes, anyway, so that's in a nutshell. Look, the organisations, they are doing a lot of things like physical barriers, CCTV, fences, they lock the bins, but yeah, there's certain antisocial behaviours where people just cut the bins, break anything that was actually useful, scatter the garbage everywhere, so it is a bit disheartening and disgraceful. So, and you've got other issues, we live in a throwaway society where you can buy things brand new in Kmart cheaper than you can actually sell those. So sometimes they are getting less, they're getting more products in than what they actually sell, which creates storage issues for them. So there's a lot of things that we have to work through as part of the waste management strategy, which I'll bring to council as well as that develops. But for now, in terms of this report, as the recommendation stands, it's allowing the CEO delegate to authorize up to 60 per organisation if that's. I think I'll summarize that. I don't think I missed anything, but yeah. Open for questions.
That's per financial year.
Yes.
You have to move it. Is there any questions first?
There's one question. I was wondering if there's an opportunity, because it's obviously quite a significant, as you highlighted, quite a significant amount of waste. And then there's a certain amount of cost around that in terms of the tip fees as well, all of those aspects. I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity to further down the track look at the development of a social enterprise that might actually use some of that investment to actually process it and create some entry-level jobs around that, so that it is actually something that actually takes that waste out of the system, takes the pressure off the businesses, and gives them all a connection through a local social enterprise resource as well. And then obviously that would limit the amount of waste, but also create some economic benefit within the community as well. And I thought it could be considered as part of the waste strategy.
Perhaps you can have some input to JP when he's writing the policy.
A follow up on that too, because I did some work with operations like that in the Hunter Centre Coast in New South Wales, and one was social enterprises dealing with 3% of the electronic waste, if you like, all of that element, the e-waste, and they were employing 60 people, and that was only 3% of the waste of the region that they were processing the e-waste, and 60 people with disabilities within that business, and generating a surplus on operation as well. So I think there's some opportunities to look at around those different new operations.
Absolutely.
It's through you there, Brad. I think the Salvation Army, when I was talking to them about it. Oh, sorry.
Questions? Clarifying
No,
questions?
it's okay.
Clarifying questions?
No.
We've got a mover. And you didn't want to speak on it? Or you did?
No, I don't want to speak on it. No, it's all very clear, and JP explained it beautifully.
Can I have a second then, please? Deputy Mayor Ritchie, you want to speak on it, Jack?
No, only just to add that, that's good. There's an opportunity to look at that.
Okay, thanks. Speakers for or against, Robin?
I was just going to say, I'm interrupted, apologies. I know that the Salvation Army actually sent a lot here to Adelaide that they can't use, and instead of going to the dump, I think Dennis Transport take it to Adelaide for it to be recycled, similar to what you're suggesting. So whether there's enough to do here, I don't know if they all got together. It's a great idea, and it's good to see that their bins have decreased. But I wonder whether that's why others have increased. Looking at it,
Councillor Storm.
Certainly in favour of the concessions. It is a huge issue. It's a cultural issue that unfortunately the Salvation Army and St Vincent's, all those dumped with the problem. So it's a matter of whether there's any way council can look upstream and look at, so there's bigger discussions that have to happen in a disposable society, but certainly in favour of concessions.
I think it's great that the council representatives have been talking with the organisations to let them know that we're interested.
Absolutely, and I think as part of the waste management strategy, we'll obviously, similar to what we've done with the economic development strategy, where we had council's input and ideas and gathering and all that sort of stuff. We'll have some of the sessions on that to you know, to bring, because this issue has to be tackled on multiple levels from different angles. And I think, you know, there was some great ideas thrown about, like, you know, do we need bigger bins? Do we need a hard waste collection service? Do we need this? So, you know, there's all these little things, like small things that we can change relatively easy, that could have a significant impact. And then, but there's absolutely going to be a massive community engagement piece, because if we can't change people's behaviors or how they see or treat rubbish at the home, you know, you might be wasting a lot of money and should be probably focusing on something else. So very exciting stuff coming up.
Right.
Am I allowed to ask a question? Do we know roughly, like with the waste that is done, is it mainly like clothing, or is it a lot of hard rubbish, e-waste?
A lot of hard rubbish, and so a combination of things. So because people go through the garbage to try and steal a lot of the good stuff that they find valuable, even the stuff that they could salvage and fix, they trample on and break and all that sort of stuff. A lot of it is electronic equipment and baby equipment that they actually are now regulated and can't actually sell from safety perspective and all that sort of stuff. So that could just be an education piece, but even that, you know, you'd have people dumping a fryer with still chips and oil in it, just on top of the clothes and everything, you know. So there's again multiple factors on different angles. We're going to have to tackle this one.
All those in favour? Motion carried. Thank you. Thanks, Jacqueline.
Yeah, Brad, just clarified, so just in relation to the question in the car park, there is a conversation happening between our managers who are assets and operations and the sports at the moment. That's a response I had. The other car park I was thinking that was really on spot, which I got no response from.
Yeah, thank you.
Just to clarify with that. And also just hoping that maybe we might be able to deal with item 17.3 first, and then we can release Kathleen who's joined us tonight, and then we can come back to 17.1, 17.2.
Right, that's how it works. Okay. Item 15.2, development services, there are nil. 15.3, environment and community safety is nil. Item 15.4, major projects is nil. Item 16, confidential council committee reports and minutes is nil. As per the request from the CEO, we'll skip straight to item 17.3, which is a confidential report on the Foreshore project playground tender. So I can ask all those people that aren't involved to thanks, Joe. Or you close the door.
He's involved.
We're definitely recording.
Yes, we will stop the recording, so once the resolution is moved.
Okay, so we've got a recommendation to go into confidence there. The substantiation is there. I'm not going to go into that. So can I have a mover for that, please? Deputy Mayor Ritchie, you want to speak on it, Jack? I have a second, Councillor Broadfoot, you want to speak on it? Questions? All those in favour? Motion carried. Into confidence at, you've got the time.
7:32.
So item 7.3, you would have received this as a